what it kind of tells us is how bad our food sources are actually. The antibiotics in our food, the emulsifiers in our food, like PGMR in candy bars, and they put them in even organic foods. And these emulsify or thin out that mucosal layer, destroy
Interesting.
the home of the bacteria. Synthetic sugars like aspartame, Splenda, and NutraSweet, and even stevia. All these synthetic sugars actually kill the bacteria in your gut.
Welcome to the CoachMD Podcast. I'm Dr. Charles Glassman, bringing you 3 decades of experience as a physician and a coach. Join us as we navigate the maze of medical advice with real-life stories, empowering you to take charge of your health. In our That Happens segment, guests share transformative experiences, reminding us that we're all human and not just patients. So get ready for a journey into healthcare reimagined, where empowerment and discovery pave the way. Hey, it's Dr. Charles, aka CoachMD. In over 30 years of medical practice, I made it my goal to help you create a strong mind, a healthy body, and an unshakable spirit. And to do that, it was always my goal not to take care of patients. You've heard me say this over and over and over again, that I really, in my over 30 years, I really didn't like to be looked at as the doctor that someone would come to and say, "Oh, my doctor's taking care of me." No, I really wanted to with my patients, and now my audience here, is to give people the tools to empower them to take care of themselves, because so often we rely on other people to do things that we really should be doing ourselves, or things that we should be thinking about ourselves, and not just kind of dump it in the lap of somebody else, but to get a truly full and satisfying and healthy life, we need to take everything into consideration. And that's why I'm doing this podcast, the CoachMD Podcast. And my guest today, Ty Griffin, we're gonna engage in a very robust conversation here, and one that I'm excited about, because honestly, I don't know a lot about it, and it's the microbiome. And what is the microbiome? Well, Ty's going to talk a little bit about that, but just to give a little preview, we have more bacteria in our body than we do cells in our body. So they have to have some impact on our health, right? I mean, cells in our body operate every body system, every major organ, every microscopic, everything in our body. If we have more bacteria in our body than cells, something has to be going on. We something it's they're not all bad for us, right? So Ty, thank you so much for coming on today. And I know my audience is, and I have my audience and myself have a lot of questions about it. So if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, and kind of what got you interested in learning about bugs and bacteria in our body, and why it's so important, to what you think is so important about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, my background is in bacteria. I've been on the industry side of antibiotics for the last 27 years. Uh, and over the course of those 27 years, from the physicians I talked to, the researchers I talked to, the microbiome I was fascinated with the fact that going back 2,000 years, they looked at the microbiome. The Chinese used to, for dysentery, would take people that didn't have dysentery and take their stools and actually feed it to the people that had dysentery, and it would cure them. It would fix it. And that led to research in the fecal microbiota in transplants, and the fascinating work that they've been doing since 1990 in the US, mostly with C. diff and other scenarios where they take other people's stool and put it back through a colonoscopy or a rectal administration, and it restores the dysbiosis in the gut. It was fascinating to me that all of us have a different microbiome. It's altered a little bit, but the majority, we have over 1,000 different species of
Mm,
bacteria.
wow.
But up to 100 trillion total organisms. And to me, learning more about the effect of the gut brain axis, and used to, people thought that the gut brain axis was just the gut telling the brain that you needed to go to the bathroom or you were hungry. But recent and well over the last 12 years, the research is showing no, there's way more to that. The gut brain axis, the gut kidney axis. About 2 years ago, there were only about four companies that were really interested in the investment side of what companies were researching. Today, in just 2 short years, there's 200
Wow.
companies.
Wow.
Um, Pfizer has bought into this scenario. They've merged or bought rights to a company called Vendata Sciences. They're a research outfit. There's a company out there called Apellis that looks at the lung microbiome, which they thought was a sterile site, but
Right.
have learned in recent that the lung is not a sterile site. Um, Freya is a great company out there looking at the vaginal microbiome.
Wow.
Uh, but looking at that, it fascinated me. And so about 3 years ago, I started looking at trying to get on the industry side of the microbiome. Um, and I'm and that's where I've landed. I've been here now 2 years on with a biotech company that does microbiome im- research and stuff. But I go around the country and I meet with gastroenterologists, ID docs. We talk about um, all their research and what they're doing. It's crazy. It started with fecal transplants in the
Yeah.
sense that
Yep.
there's a bunch of data where they took stool from skinny people and put it in obese people, and they became skinny.
God. Wow.
And they've taken stool. The NIH and the federal government has done a ton of studies on the gut brain axis and taken stool from people and brought PTSD and depression people back from the Iraq War, and they did fecal transplants from what they called just happy people and put it into these patients with PTSD and depression, and it healed them.
Wow.
It,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So yeah, what I want to, it's so interesting to me. I as a physician, um, during my residency, my one of my favorite rotations was infectious disease, and I felt I became kind of really good at knowing the different antibiotics and the different bacteria, and of course, when we look at bacteria from a uh, from a physician point of view, like modern medicine, like conventional medicine, it's a sick care model. So we're looking at it from the lens of, okay, you're sick, I'm going to give you something to fix it. Um, so in when it comes to the infectious disease, we have the tendency to look at, okay, bacteria is bad, and we're going to give you an antibiotic to fix it, and you're going to be all better. And really, as you're talking about, the history has shown, when we really look back, is that, and what I had said in the introduction about how we have more bacterial organisms, living organisms, functioning organisms with lifespans in our body, more than we have cells in our body. And so there has to be some type of symbiosis, some type of getting along with the bacteria uh, and our cells. And it sounds as though, oh, and let me just actually go back a couple things you said, just to clarify for my audience who may not know it. What Ty is talking about, the fecal transplants, that's exactly what it's talking about. It's taking stool from one place and implanting it into another body, another person. And so we all know that stool is loaded with bacteria, and Ty had mentioned certain bacteria that, like C. difficile, he mentioned. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's bacteria that overgrows. So, and this has got a lot to talk about, but uh, it's what kind of, like you mentioned, the biotech company that you're working for, and we'll leave links to anything that you want to share. I'll leave that in the description. But what kind of, like what's the hot research that you say that right now? You mentioned the gut brain connection. What are some of the things that you really that your company's working on, for instance?
Well, I mean, my company is mostly in the realm of C. diff right now. We research other things.
Yeah.
I think for me, what's fascinating is the breadth of research that's going on all over the country. Stanford's looking at fecal transplants in congestive heart failure. They're
Mm,
finding that most CHF patients are missing bifidobacterium and lactobacillus. There's Duke University's doing research in ALS, where they do fecal transplants in ALS patients. There's places around the country that are looking at Alzheimer's disease and putting
mm,
in fecal transplants. What's fascinating is what it kind of tells us is how bad our food sources are actually,
mm.
and the antibiotics in our food, the emulsifiers in our food. The crazy thing about this is it's twofold. The bacteria in our gut, as you knew, Dr. Glassman, they live in the mucosal layer.
Yeah.
Um, and they're protected in there. The problem is in our food sources in the US, we have a lot of emulsifiers like PGMR in candy bars and
Mm,
soy lectin and gar gum and locust bean gum and monodiglycerides and diglycerides, and they put them in even organic foods. And these emulsify or thin out that mucosal layer, destroy
interesting.
the home of the bacteria. But then you add in, there was a study in Lancet and a study in the Journal of Nature where they've realized that synthetic sugars like aspartame, Splenda, and NutraSweet, and even stevia, all these sucralose, all these synthetic sugars actually kill the bacteria in your gut.
Wow.
Um, there's some fascinating research that they found where they're looking at obesity. They know in obese patients that it's a ratio of Bacteroides bacteria to Firmicutes bacteria. If you have more Bacteroides bacteria, you will not store fat in adipose tissue. You will be insulin sensitive. You will put off GLP-1s, and the bacteria secretes these GLP-1s and semaglutides. If it's the reverse and you have more Firmicutes bacteria because of your diet and what you're eating, what kills, then you will store fat in adipose tissue. You will be insulin
Mm,
resistant, and you shut down the enzymatic and peptide release of these things
wow.
that down the brain to tell you you're satiated. Um,
Very interesting. Yeah, I'd have
there,
to ask you, just to interrupt for a second. Now, you mentioned Bacteroides. You said those people who have a predominance of Bacteroides
Mhm.
are thinner or healthier. Is that what you said? Okay,
They're
so
thin. They're
okay, so this is very interesting because so when I was in medical school, we used to have these uh, student cabarets or whatever. We used to put
uh-huh,
on these shows, whatever, these skits. And I
uh-huh,
actually, and so Bacteroides is what's called an anaerobic bacteria.
right.
So Bacteroides does not need oxygen to survive. Okay, so my skit I put together with some friends. It was a it was a like a gym class and my name was Roy D. Okay. And so the advertisement for the class was let's get back to Roy D's. Okay. And so we all had like things on our head, like the
Mhm.
like smother us because we were exercising, doing it wasn't aerobic like because aerobics when I was going to medical school was in the 80s, okay, when
Yeah,
aerobics
right.
was really coming out. So
Oh, yeah,
this was
Jane Fonda.
anaerobics, right? Jane Fonda, exactly. This was anaerobic, so it was back to Roides for anaerobic exercise. So, but that was it. But so back to Roides, in our gut, and you talk to any doctors out there, and I actually do want to talk about the C. difficile because I think it's
Mhm,
really important, and especially my
mhm,
listeners, because bacteroides, we only doctors know bacteroides, like when someone has diverticulitis. Okay, so
mhm,
diverticulitis is an infection in the colon. It's like a little pocket that develops in the colon that gets blocked up, and bacteroides can overgrow and
Mhm.
cause an abscess or an infection. So if you surveyed 95% of doctors, maybe 99% of doctors,
Mhm.
and you ask them, is bacteroides good for you or bad for you? They're going to say bad for you. And
Mhm.
you need antibiotics like Flagyl or some other antibiotics to knock out the bacteroides because it's bad for you. Okay.
Right.
But in balance, it's not bad for you. It's only bad for you when it overgrows, when it gets too much. And like C. difficile, Clostridial difficile, and my people listening may know that because it's so rampant, it's everywhere, and not only the antibiotics that we give people, but as you're saying, Ty, in our food sources, they kill out the good bacteria to let something like Clostridia difficile overgrow, and it's a score, it's an epidemic.
Right.
Um, when I was practicing, when I used to make hospital rounds, and this is the bad thing is that I don't know if it's changed now because I haven't been in the hospital now in about 5 years. But when I was even 5 years ago, any of my patients who were on um, antibiotics, okay, I would I would prescribe. The only probiotic that they had on the formulary was acidophilus. That was it,
Mhm.
Bassett. Okay, it was the only one. And I talked to the infectious disease. Oh no, this is all we need. So I would have them smuggle in Florastor
Yeah, yeah.
because
Great.
because and I would tell their family members, bring in Florastor because they're blasting
Mhm.
and I remember, one of the gastroenterologists, when he was looking over the chart, but this was like in 2008, he was laughing at me. And I was saying, you have my patient on Prilosec,
Mhm.
okay, which is killing the acid in their gut, which is going to, you know, contribute to the overgrowth of the bad bacteria.
Yep.
Okay, you're blasting them with antibiotics. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the thing. So C. difficile, my listeners, you probably have known someone who's had it. It's very hard to get rid of.
Yeah.
Very hard to get rid of. And yeah, so I mean, I'm sure this makes a lot of sense to you, Ty.
Yeah.
We've heard these stories. Yeah.
Well, and the issue is, antibiotics are absolutely
Of
necessary in acute
course. Yeah.
situations,
Of
right?
course.
I
Yeah.
mean, you got a community acquired pneumonia or pneumonia. The
Yeah.
problem is the collateral damage scenario of it. But what we also don't take into effect is a patient. So you might get, augmentin or Levaquin for a pneumonia or bronchitis, and then you go home and you're drinking a Diet Coke and
Yeah.
you're eating some bread with calcium propionate. Calcium propionate's a mold inhibitor in bread to give it a
Mm,
month shelf life. Well, it,
wow.
it acts as an antibiotic in our gut. It
Right.
wipes out good bacteria in our gut. Next thing you know, you you throw in a little bit of poor sleep. Poor sleep actually kills bacteria in the gut as well when we don't sleep well. So you've got this scenario where it's this perfect storm, right? And that symbiosis of the gut just
Mm,
eats. And now you've got this overgrowth of any number of bacteria can become bad when it's the dominant bacteria,
right.
And I think, most people don't realize that. And even like you were talking about Bacteroides earlier, that's the
Yeah.
the top phylum, it's the top of the umbrella, right? Then below it's like the species and genus, so there could be Bfrag and all these different scenarios under that. And yeah, when anytime you get out of that dysbiosis, researchers and doctors and scientists are starting to realize now that uh, this affects everything in the body. Your gut affects everything in the body. The bacteria, it's fascinating. The more and more there's a Dr. Zergani, he's on. I follow him on LinkedIn. He's
Hmm.
a researcher. Posts a lot of fascinating research of his and other people. He's really big about trying to get the word out about the microbiome. There's a multitude of scenarios that you wouldn't even possibly begin to fathom of what it affects. I mean, there's a company out there called right out of New Jersey, up there by you, Microna, and they're
Mm.
research that you can put bacteria back in the gut and get rid of kidney stones through the gut
Mm.
kidney axis. Um, uh, I don't know where they are in their research, but I've read articles about what they're doing. And it's fascinating to me that every piece of this massive amount of bacteria in the body affects everything. There's data on orthopedic surgery and microbiome and how the bacteria in the gut actually are almost more important at bone growth than, say, calcium per se. It's
Mm.
fascinating that they put off these peptides and enzymes that help the development of bone. Um, and our gut turns over about every 28 days or so.
Mm.
Um, if you look at the companies that pay donors for their feces, there's a multitude of companies that buy stool. Uh, I mean,
Yeah.
crazy, crazy,
Right.
but
Right.
there are literally people out there that are they're looked at as having the most biodiverse grouping of bacteria, and they'll make 180 to $200,000 a year just selling their stool to industry.
Huh.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Wow.
crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, it's but it goes back to, it's kind of sad, but it goes back to, in the US, how bad our food sources are and ultra processed foods, um, that we're needing to buy stool from healthy individuals
Right. Right.
trying
Right. Yeah.
trying to repair disease. But um, Bacteroides is key in our immune system. It's the cornerstone of our immune system. Firmicutes is the cornerstone of the anti-inflammatory
Mm.
cascade in the body. Researchers have found this, and so when you deplete that, say you lose firmicutes, you're in this constant state of inflammation. So imagine that's why we have this bolster of autoimmune diseases in people, because there's natamycin in shredded cheese. It's convenience kind of kills us, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
we don't want to shred a block of cheese, so we buy a package of pre-shredded cheese, and they have to add an antibiotic to it to keep it from molding in the package.
Mm.
And so you eat that, and then it just starts to wipe out the bacteria in your gut, and over again. So the nachos at home are kind of detrimental in the sense that if we just went a little bit closer to the source, kind of like going back 2 or 3 generations
Mm.
in our families, they you look at, it's fascinating to me if you just Google image like public places in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and 50s, even
Yeah.
Times Square, Coney Island, Chicago.
Yes. Yes.
Everybody was thin.
Yeah.
Ev-
Yeah.
Body types were all the same, and it's got to be what we're eating now, because you think about it, the meal preps aren't different. We all eat kind of cycle the same meals through, right? Especially
Right.
busy families,
Yes. Yeah.
eat spaghetti one night, tacos one night, But the problem is, back then, the, the sources of the food weren't, you couldn't go to the store and buy a lean cuisine, or whatever, a TV dinner or whatever. Um, because, and you prepped that food and it had less chemicals. So even if you read a lot of the research on like glyphosate in the gut wipes out bacteria.
Mm.
uh, and so when it starts to break down and destroy that bacteria, you imagine the immune system goes right.
Yeah.
uh, but there's a lot of fascinating scenarios where they have taken the microbiome. Even in cancer, they're looking at doing fecal transplants. There's a company out there called Microbiotica
Yeah.
that's doing stuff with Merck and Keytruda, where they do fecal transplants in those and restore the dysbiotic gut, and they get better success rates in treating cancer patients.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So Keytruda just my audience is an immune modulating drug. It's that's being used for mainly for lung cancer, and that's what Ty is talking about, the interplay between the gut microbiome and the immune system. So um, the immune stimulating drugs like Keytruda to help our body attack the cancer, and this is almost an adjuvant in a way, thinking about the microbiome. And you know again, as doctors, we think of the of bacteria as always bad because that's what we're treating. I there's arguably there's nothing more effective in modern medicine than antibiotics and their use against life-threatening illnesses, life-threatening bacterial illnesses. But again, it's a balance, and I can't help but thinking of the situation that happened. Dear friends of ours, their son, I think, was 5 years old at the time, and he was sick, and they brought him to the ER. He might have had pneumonia. They blasted him with just third generation cephalosporins, which are very high dose antibiotics that wipe out your most of the bacteria in your body. And they wanted to wipe out the bacteria that might have been in his lung. And he probably got, I don't know, 3 days worth of that, whatever. Well, several months later, and to me, it seems like it's a direct effect, or right around the same time, he started having blood in his stool, and he has Crohn's disease. He's had Crohn's disease since he's been 5 years old. And
Oh,
I can't think of, yeah, sure, certainly there are genetic variants and genetic contributions to people who have Crohn's disease, and we don't know what it is, and I'm not going to pretend that I know what caused his Crohn's disease, but it just seems that we're very irresponsible sometimes when we know that antibiotics are so effective and we give them just willy-nilly. And um, I know it's hard for doctors, especially as an internist for so many years. People come into the office wanting to get a pill. Just they whether they have a cold or not, they want an
mhm.
antibiotic. They want something. And I remember back in the day when Jim Henson died of this. Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets, died of the pneumonia in a New York hospital. Killed him in like 2 days. We
Yep.
had Everybody would come in and just
Mhm.
sniffles, cough. They would come in, and a lot of dentists and ENT doctors, they prescribe so many cephalosporins, which are
Mhm.
important for some reason, but they very rarely do they prescribe something to go along with it. And I had a good buddy of mine who had a really bad sinus infection, for finally diagnosed after months, and his doctor put him on high dose antibiotics. Again, I told him, go out and get Floristore, pick it up, and he didn't get C. diff. But I know so many people who, when they didn't take something, and it's not a cure all, I mean,
Right.
Floristore, but at least you're doing something to restore, um, as the name says, flora store. You're restoring the flora when you take an antibiotic. And if you don't learn anything from this podcast, learn this. If your doctor puts you on an antibiotic, you need to take probiotics. And that's what I'm going to ask you, Ty. Do you have any what does somebody do like on a regular basis? Do you take probiotics? What probiotics do you take? Do you take them every day? Do you take them just when you're on antibiotics? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I do. They're my personal opinions, and
That's fine. That's fine. I don't
I
care. Just
I so well, one, first and foremost, natural sources are always the best. Live bacteria, when you take it in, it goes right to the mucosal layer. A lot of probiotics, it depends on the capsule and can it survive the sulfuric acid, and then it's got to take in fluid and bloom. The bacteria's got to bloom and then get back into the mucosal wall. And so I absolutely believe they help. Don't get me wrong, but then
yeah.
it becomes a game of coliforming units. Like, can you overcome the system, right? By put, my one would have 80 million coliforming units, or this one has, 100 million coliforming units. Um, for me, it's natural sources. I think kefir and yogurts.
Mm,
I personally, and this is a little controversial in a lot of corners, but I think we raw milk. I mean,
mm,
unpasteurized raw milk, and I know, and that is not. I'm not saying people should take it.
right.
Definitely consult your physician. Let your physician tell you what you need to do, and especially if you're immunocompromised, stay away.
Right.
But I think that when you look at what's in it, the bacteria that's there, and especially if you're getting it from a farm where, and it's not, I mean, it's not even legal in most states, right? The USDA does not allow raw milk, and I think 7 or 8 states allow the sale. California actually allows the commercial sale
Mm,
of raw milk in stores. They're the only state that does it. But that being said, that is a live source of
mm,
bacteria that actually can survive and get into the mucosal layer. It's loaded with bifidobacterium and lactobacillus. It's but that's, consult your physician before you run out and do anything like that. I
yeah.
mean, but and I wouldn't say that, but I drink it. I've been doing it for 2 years. But I live in Oklahoma. I
Mm,
go to a dairy farm not far from my
oh,
house.
nice.
I know the dairy farmer. I know his cows. I know his process. I know how he does it. I watched him. I see his
Mm,
fields. All of the above. But no, I think there are some really good probiotics out there. I think that there's one out there called Orthobiotic. It's a great product.
yes. Yeah, I know
Uh,
that actually. Orthobiotic is, I used to, every time my patients would get an antibiotic, they'd
mhm.
get a jar of orthobiotic, the
You're brilliant.
orthomolecular. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It
Because
is
it
a
has the
great product.
Saccharomyces in it, which
Yeah.
which most antibiotics don't have, which
Hmm.
is the Fluorostor, which
Yeah.
helps with the to restore the
Hmm.
that I guess Saccharomyces is the mold,
Yeah.
a yeast that
Mhm.
restores that when the good yeast. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to interrupt
Oh
you.
no, and it's got Archimenzia and Bifidobacterium, and I mean it's probably the most diverse probiotic I've seen. I think
Mm,
the difference is, though, when you look at big companies, like they talk about prebiotics and stuff, you can get caught in the sense that if there's no bacteria there to feed, what, and
right.
then a lot of the prebiotics like Metamucil touts that it's a great prebiotic, it's a great fiber. The problem is they put aspartame and aspartame potassium in
Mm,
there as a
wow.
sweetener to help uh, the flavoring. The problem is that kills bacteria in the gut, so
Right.
it's counterproductive.
Right.
And so I think if you're looking at fiber, then a good organic psyllium husk or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean that I've talked to clinicians and naturopaths and doctors. They've always kind of steered me that way. Um, I think that, but I think you have to, like you said earlier, you really need to take control of your health and
Yeah.
investigate it. Do your own research. Talk to your physician. Um, have spend some time picking their brain. I mean, they want to help you. They want to, you know,
Yeah.
uh, you
Well,
know,
yeah, hopefully
they're-
they'll listen. The thing is that the challenge, and I know because my listeners and I talk about this, the challenge is that a lot of times when you go to your doctor, they'll say, and it's a when they say this, my listeners know what it means when they say, "Oh, there's no studies. The studies don't show that, whatever." It means that they don't know. Yeah, there you go, right there. You have this
this is
decision.
just this is just a touch of the iceberg. This is
Right,
what
right.
printed to take on the plane
Right.
when I fly around the
Some
country.
some
But
light reading, yeah, but,
yeah,
you talk about the prebiotic one that I always, uh, can remember because its initials are FOS, okay, full of, you fill in the blank, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
fructooligosaccharide,
Oh, yeah.
FOS, feeding. But I want to ask you about kombucha.
Yeah,
Like, what about kombucha? Like, I don't like the taste. I've
yeah.
tried it, whatever, but
Mhm.
some people love it. But that is that a good source, would you say, of
Yeah. I mean, I think any fermented food,
that's
especially
the key, fermented? Okay,
yeah,
that's
traditional fermentations like kimchi and
okay.
uh, old school fermented pickles, are
Mm,
great where they have a true fermentation process to it. Even there's actually a paper out there done by a gastroenterologist on uh, small batch uh, beers that are not mass
mm,
produced, beers from your local brewer. Those are a great source actually, even though there's alcohol in it, and alcohol does can kill but there's actually a low amount of alcohol in some kombuchas too. So but
interesting.
but yeah, I think any and all sources, vegetables, that are clean of pesticides, organic scenarios, they'll ferment in the gut when you eat them. And then yogurts, I think definitely, I don't think probiotics hurt. I just think I'd find one that where they've put some thought into it and they have a closed supply chain where, it's you can't, uh, you know, uh, they're a little pharmaceutical grade. A lot of your pharmacies will carry these, but orthobiotics, my favorite.
Right.
But Florister is a great one, actually, too. Uh, there's a multitude of them, but after that, I think just really look at your diet and look for the cleanest source. If you're going to eat red meat, eat grass finished red
Hmm.
meat, because there's no glyphosate in it. Bison, lamb. If you're going to eat fish, choose wild caught. There's still going to be a little bit of metal in there probably, um, but just and the thing is, I know the cost of everything is insane right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Groceries are expensive. I would fall back to I don't even know whoever said it, but there's a quote out there that your food can be your medicine or your medicine can be
Yeah.
your food.
Yeah.
Um, I highly recommend spend it on your food and it will take care of you,
Yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
move. When you look at the blue zones around the world where there's the most centenarians, these people mainly because they really grow their own food just because
Yeah.
of a aspect. And when you're growing your own food, you wouldn't believe the exercise you get getting out
Right.
there, squatting down, bending over, move. It's just movement that helps us. We're a society that sits on the couch and door dashes, fast food to our house,
Hmm.
and um, it's just the convenience is killing us slowly.
Yeah.
Like because we're we're just relying on, and I don't think there's a nefariousness in big food. I think they're just giving us what we want, right? We want
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Yeah, I agree. We want convenience. We want fast,
shelf life. We want
shelf
shelf
life.
life. We want our
Exactly.
we want our food to look appetizing. The
Yeah.
funny thing is, I've worked around the hospitals my whole life, and in mayonnaise, they add EDTA. EDTA is a pharmaceutical in the
Yeah.
hospital for when you had mercury poisoning.
Right. It's chelation. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you pull mercury out of the body or heavy metals out of the body.
Yeah.
We put it in mayonnaise to make it white and keep it white for a long time and keep it from separating and make it
Mm,
look pretty and give it a shelf life. And all the time it's pulling magnesium and potassium and
mm.
chromium and copper out of our body. I mean, we're
Wow.
we're really nutrient deficient as humans. Most of us are
Yeah.
walking on magnesium deficient, and then when you're magnesium deficient, you can have a lot of heart issues, AFib, all these scenarios. Uh, you, and
Yeah.
it's it's just I know because you've been in practice and you see it, but
Yeah.
I know when and I'm not a clinician, but I talk to him every day,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating to me. And and the healthcare system is getting away from the true doctor patient relationship.
Yeah.
It's about speed and protocol now. It's like
Yeah.
everything, you see this, you do this,
Yeah.
it's
It's
in
a checklist, just a
yeah.
checklist. Yeah.
It's like I hate that for physicians because
Yeah.
it taking a lot of the autonomy and why they got into medicine in the first place. I mean, they were scientists and part Sherlock Holmes. It's like we're taking that out of their hands where
Yeah.
they treat every patient as an individual, and now it is like almost conveyor belt medicine. Like especially in hospitals, everything's protocolized. If
Yeah.
if it's community acquired pneumonia, this hospital only gives these two drugs,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
you can't go outside that formulary.
Right. And you don't get paid if you don't
Yeah,
get,
right,
that's
right.
the whole
And
thing.
you get a
Yeah.
letter saying you
Yes.
don't follow our formulary, we're
Right.
not going to get,
Right. You don't get, and
yeah.
you won't get reimbursement from Medicare because they have the certain criteria. And I mean, that's why I went into, started the concierge practice in 2002, as we were chatting before,
Hmm.
before we went on, is that, um, I couldn't take it because even back in the day, this was 2002 when I did this. So I had been in practice for about 14 years already. And it was getting like that. That's when it was really starting to rev up. It wasn't, uh, the hospitals weren't buying up the practice. They weren't consolidating until Obamacare came in and removed the monopoly, uh, restriction on that to allow big conglomerates to come in and locally buy up practices and hospitals.
Hmm.
But certainly at that time, HMOs were very big and dictating what we could do. And I couldn't take it anymore. And I wasn't being able to treat individuals. It was just getting to be conveyor belt. So I switched to that more personalized practice. So I was able to take a step back and to really think about things. So when I saw a patient in the hospital, I wasn't rushing.
Hmm.
They were only one of a couple, maybe a handful of patients I had. I was able to think about, okay, what's this antibiotic doing? What's this uh, acid medication doing to the gut? Actually,
Hmm.
that's a question I want to ask you about
Yeah.
because I had talked about this years ago, and now all this stuff. Now the gastroenterologists, with all due respect to my colleagues, are thinking they're geniuses because they now know that the PPI inhibitors, I mean the PPIs that they're giving, proton pump inhibitors, the Prilosec, the Propulsids, all these medications are doing so much to affect the microbiome now because it's completely cutting off acid in our gut, which you could tell us a little bit about that, Ty.
Yeah. Yeah, there are tons of papers now on proton pump inhibitors and their effect on the microbiome as a whole, effect on C. diff, effect on in fact I was just pulling these two or three papers, but yeah, absolutely. You change the acid production, you'll change the whole microbiome.
Right,
And
the downstream stuff. Yeah.
absolutely. The downstream effect is horrible. It affects everything in the gut. As far as I think, if you look at the statistics nowadays of irritable bowel syndrome and colitis and ulcerative colitis and Crohn's and all these scenarios. And and there's centers all over the country that are trying to figure out what's the best way to approach it, and a lot of them are looking at FMTs and doing FMTs and having really good success with fecal transplants. The, the scenario is the lining of the gut needs to be restored as well, and
Mm,
that mucosal wall is 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 so key. It's so,
Mm.
and
Right, that's where
it,
leaky gut comes in, right? That's what you're referring to.
absolutely. I think there's a Dr. Stephen Gundry out of, I think he's a cardiologist out of Florida.
I know Dr. Gundry. I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah.
him personally. I know his
Right,
work. Yeah.
right. You know his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he talks about the lining of the gut and leaky gut syndrome and stuff. But there's great research and information out there about it. Yeah, I think they all do. I think there's so much under the scenario of the microbiome that we still aren't there yet. We're still
Right.
peeling that onion. I mean, even in the scenarios where they look at diseases, like Alzheimer's was fascinating. The research there, they know that they're missing bifidobacterium, but that's the whole phylum, right? I
Mm.
mean, so they haven't drawn down, but they did. There was a great paper out there where they looked at dementia or pre-dementia, dementia, early onset, and they could see the progression
Mm.
of bifidobacterium depleting to where in full-blown Alzheimer's, they were missing. I mean, like it was extinct, like it was the black rhinoceros, it was gone.
Wow.
And
Wow.
um,
Interesting. Yeah, because yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but there's been a lot of uh, newer research on the link between PPIs, the proton pump inhibitors, and Alzheimer's. Maybe that's the link because of,
absolutely,
yeah, what you're talking
absolutely.
about. Yeah.
Absolutely. If you look at it, it is definitely, we do definitely know, they, in the papers they've written about it, there's a causal link, right?
Mm.
The scenario is what bacteria genus and species is exactly the causal pathogen. Because it's interesting, they know what's missing, but they
Mm.
also know what's overgrown. So they
Wow.
were talking about how Clostridium as a phylum is overgrown
Mm.
in Alzheimer's patients. So
Wow.
is it the overgrowth that's causal, or is it the extinction that's
Ah.
causal? Is
Extinction. That's so interesting. To think about it as extinction.
Mhm.
So if you that's a great, I think that's a great word and a great way to look at it because when you take the or antibiotics or get antibiotics in food or take the proton pump inhibitors, what you could be doing, you could be leading to the extinction
Mhm.
of good bacteria. And by the extinction, it just passively allows the overgrowth because it is a balance. And yeah, I think I mean this is very fascinating to me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a great, exciting field, but also, and I think you would agree with me with this as well, that you know, if you're unhealthy right now, don't think that just taking probiotics
Oh.
or fixing your microbiome is gonna fix you. Especially, let's say if you're obese, just
Mhm.
getting a fecal transplant is going to
Mhm.
fix it. You have to really pare it down and
Mhm.
understand how did you get to this place.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this is totally unrelated, but I wrote a piece some years ago when Steve Jobs died, and
Mhm.
it was about how when he found out that he had this type of pancreatic cancer, he said he was going to go all in on Eastern medicine. And
Mhm.
the piece that I wrote was, well, you don't really know what caused it. So take it out. Don't think you know what caused it.
Right.
Take it out first. Then you can
Yeah.
reel it back in and start maybe putting the pieces together of your
Mhm.
lifestyle, of whatever. Don't, something caused it. And until you know that, which you'll probably never know, but get it out first. So the same thing with if you're unhealthy, if you're not physically fit or you have
Mhm.
some other chronic illness, don't think that you're going to fix it by just repairing the microbiome because it's still we don't really know right now. I mean,
Right.
we know we're starting to know, and we're
Yeah.
starting to know the connection, but
Mhm.
we don't fully know, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I agree with you 100%.
yeah,
I think that you mentioned Steve Jobs and pancreatic cancer. There's fascinating data out there I mean, there are much smarter people than me. I'm just an observer.
and me,
But and I
right?
just like to get up
Yeah.
at 4 o'clock in the morning, get my coffee, and read. And basically, I just love to read the data. But Yeah, I think it's more about search search the guys that are experts in it. Go
Yeah.
find them. There's a Dr. Williams, he's an oncologist, and he's really brilliant guy. He trained at I think at LSU Shreveport, and I think he's now got multiple clinics all over, but you can look him up on the internet.
Mm.
But he's an oncologist, and he talks about fecal transplants
Wow.
and immunology and cancers. And he personally said, if I ever was diagnosed, or my family was diagnosed with a cancer, the
Wow.
first thing I would do is get my microbiome right.
Wow.
He talks about how the microbiome and the dysbiosis is so key in that cascade. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's still the best policy if you talk to any cancer guy is cut out what you can first, get it
Yes.
out.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Um, but I think there's a day. I think there's a day coming in the future. I don't know how far it is. If it's, you know, I see a day in the next, decade or less possibly, where you're diagnosed with a disease, you go to a microbiome department at a
Mm.
local facility, and they put back the bacteria that you're missing, and it fixes you. I mean, I
Yeah.
do see that day coming. If you put all of the research together and you
Yeah.
look at all of the different guys that are talking about it and doing it, and really investigating it hard on a day-to-day basis, um, and there needs to be follow-ups in all of their papers. They say in the conclusion, more research needs to be done,
Right.
obviously.
Right. Right.
um, but God, they're on to it. They know it. They're that close in so many scenarios where they know that our microbiome matters. It is the difference to this why we have this dis-ease, right? This dis-ease in our body.
Right.
Uh, and it touches everything. Like the Freya's looking at endometriosis is caused by a dysbiosis of the
Mm.
vaginal microbiome. Infertility caused by, I mean, conceptually, they're on
Yeah.
to this. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not there with a product or anything, but they have all the signals that are showing this is where we
Yeah,
need
it's
to.
pointing in that direction, right?
Yeah,
It's definitely, and
absolutely.
I think with AI too, because of the just the mass amount. So is it, there's uh, quadrillions of bacteria, whatever the number you
Right.
said, a whole bunch of bacteria. So the balance of them, is it, you know 20 billion of this bacteria, of this genus, of this family group, or overgrowth of it. There's so many variables of the
Yeah.
numbers and the types, and so I
Oh,
think AI will definitely, if we'll be able to put it in a machine, a stool, your stool in a machine,
yeah.
and have it spit out. No, no, I don't
Well,
want it. That's a
and
bad image, but
And
spit
to
out.
really
So,
yeah, and to blow your mind in that scenario,
yeah,
yeah, the microbiome is also the virome. And so viruses and mold and yeasts, and I mean, everything is bound up in that, right?
yeah,
And they all play a role. And when it's just shows you how fascinating the human body is,
right, yeah,
and how little we really know about it.
right,
Even
yeah,
the fact that we've been researching it and stuff, but the body is an amazing thing. And uh and the microbiome is this undeveloped organ of the body that we haven't, and I loosely call it an organ. There are docs that would call it the sixth
yes, yeah, yeah,
organ.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. um but but yeah, I think it's what fascinates me. But it just goes to show you how important everything you put on your body and in your body really is to your health.
yes,
And
yeah,
I think we as Americans, and we we trust too much in that. Hey, if it was out there on a shelf, then someone sweated it, right?
Right,
And
right.
so let's go ahead and throw those Takis back and some Cheetos and whatever and an energy drink and you know uh and and without any consequence. We think we're drinking 0 calories in a artificial sweetened drink, and we're actually doing more harm to our weight because the
Mm,
calories don't matter. It's the fact that we're wiping out the bacteria that keeps us
mm.
thin.
Wow, interesting. I kind of look at it, around 1900, Albert Einstein saw that there was so much going on that we couldn't see. And he was really the first to say that there's so much energy
Mhm,
in substances that we can't see, that we haven't harnessed. uh, E equals MC squared. There's more energy in the chair that I'm sitting on, in the atoms of the chair that I'm sitting on. What we can't see, that we don't know how to harness it. And in the same, similarly with the microbiome, there's so much of our human body
mhm,
that is beyond our comprehension, or that's microscopic, and not only the cells but the actually living organism. So yeah, this has been a great discussion, Ty. It really been great for
Yeah, I
me.
think that that points to exactly because the explosion of earlier and earlier age cancers, the explosion of more and more autoimmune diseases, the
Mm,
explosion of more and more mental illness, um, and earlier mental illness. I think we have to stop and look at that because I think we're seeing it unfold in front of us, and it really points to the microbiome because we're all affected by what we
mm,
eat, right?
yeah.
I mean, you think, you know, s- Mrs. Smith down the street, she's eating all organic and everything, but if Mrs. Smith is eating out at a restaurant 1 or 2 nights a week, uh, we're all in the same boat once we go out of the house because you
Mm,
don't control that food source anymore. You and when you go to restaurants, you can go to great restaurants, but they all use the same wholesalers. They all use the same distributors. They're all getting foods from US Foods or Cisco or whoever, and they're all processed foods. They're all chemically cured meats. When you look at like colorectal cancer, you look at chemically cured meats. I live out in Oklahoma. My brother lives in Kansas. His buddy is runs a big packing plant, right?
mm,
In the old days, when you cured bacon or cured a lunch meat, you smoked it, right? In a smokehouse or in a smoker with celery juice or whatever. Now they use an automotive paint sprayer and
oh my God. Oh,
the meat just comes down a conveyor belt and they
oh,
just spray it with sodium nitrate, sodium erythrobate, sodium
oh
phosphate,
man. Oh,
all of these chemicals.
yeah.
But then we go to the store and we're like, hey, we're going to grab that Dietz and Watson ham. And
Right.
you don't think anything about it. You think it's safe and
Wow.
healthy.
Mm,
And it's so crazy now that when you go to the store to you you actually buy uncured meat, but it's still cured. It's just
yeah.
cured the old way. But
Yeah.
marketing people call it uncured
Oh,
because
wow.
it's
Right.
cured with a chemical.
Right.
But
So
it's
you should get uncured meat, is what you're saying. That would be better.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
think if you're going to eat lunch meat, you should get uncured meat. I
Yeah.
think your pepperonis, everything. I think if you're buying bread, buy it from a local baker. Get away from anything. If you pick up a package in your house right now
Mm,
and it's got more than 3 or 4 ingredients,
mm,
throw it. I mean, if it's got stuff you can't pronounce, you shouldn't eat it.
yeah.
It's got a shelf life outside of a few days, so you shouldn't eat it. I mean, bread in the old days, if you go to a bakery and buy a sourdough loaf of bread that's,
Mm,
a sourdough, a starter culture, water and an unbleached flour, that in 5 days on the counter, that bread will, the entire loaf will turn green.
Right.
But if
Yeah.
you go to the grocery store and buy an organic Oro wheat bread and you bring it home, it'll stay, it'll stay, it won't turn green at all for months. It'll never turn green. It actually
Yeah.
just gets little specks of green on it, and but it'll stay soft and appetizing for months. I
Mhm.
mean, that shouldn't happen, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
if that goes in your gut, it's going to kill everything in its path. Um, and so, yeah, I think that anymore, uh, you need to try to really spend some time at the grocery store. If that's where you're shopping,
Yeah.
I highly recommend drive out to the country, go to a local farmer,
Yeah.
buy buy his meat directly from him.
Mm.
He'll they'll know a processor. They'll know, buy your vegetables straight from a local
Yeah.
farmer. Buy your dairy from them, buy your butter from them, get spend that day, drive a
Mm.
nice family drive on Sunday. Go buy your week's groceries from a good source,
Yeah.
um, because it matters. It really matters.
Yeah.
I read an article a while back that when you go to a grocery store, that there's thousands of products in there, right? But
Yeah.
really only about 3 or 4 companies own them all.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense, actually. Yeah.
I don't think people realize that the
Yeah.
majority of the foods in their pantry are actually owned by uh, R.J. Reynolds, the tobacco company,
Yeah.
or Philip Morris.
Yeah.
They started buying up food companies back, when during those
Right.
tobacco lawsuits, right?
Right. Yep.
They kind of took the same model. We'll buy a successful brand and we'll part out
Yeah.
the ingredients to cheaper ingredients, or
Yeah.
to, you know, I think there's going to come a day where they, the lawyers look at that tobacco lawsuit and how that
Yeah.
unfolded, and they're going
Yeah.
to go after big food,
Yeah.
because it's the same concept. It's the same,
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
path.
Yeah.
Cheapen the ingredients, arguably make them more addictive. There's a study out of, um, and this study's probably, I don't know, 12 to 15 years old. I remember one time I was a rep, and if someone can't, if a doctor canceled on me, I'd go over to the university and sit through grand rounds, and just sit there and eat my lunch in the back of the hospital. And they had a speaker from University of Maryland. He was an
Mm.
endocrinologist, and he talked about the a study he did in rats with high fructose corn syrup, and
Mm.
he proved how high fructose corn syrup, like he had 1,000 rats over here and 1,000 rats over here, and he fed them the same food, and he monitored how much they ate and how much they defecated and all that stuff. And then in this group, he added just pure cane sugar water to their food, and in this group, he added high fructose corn syrup. And the rats over here ate 3, 4 times their body weight over here.
Wow.
High- So he proved that it was more,
Wow.
the
Yeah.
rat ate the pure cane sugar, basically ate the same amount of food and didn't go back, and they could eat as much as they wanted, right? And so it was pretty fascinating. It
Yeah.
was that day, and this was like 15 years ago. I came home and I had, you know, Coke and Fanta,
Right.
all these drinks in my fridge, my garage fridge, and I came home and I was taking them out, and my wife was like, "What are you doing?" I was like,
Right.
"To donate these. I'm getting them out of my house."
Right. Right.
And it
Yeah.
was,
Well, yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, the interplay between, just the bigger corporations, and like you said, it's not nothing big conspiracy. It's just kind of giving people what they want, which is not good for them, and it's obviously affecting our body. Ty, thank you so much for coming on my program today. I mean, this has been such a whirlwind of information, and I know my audience is appreciative of that, of your knowledge, because you definitely have imparted a lot of it. A lot of, I frankly, I don't know a lot about this. We're just trying to do the best we can. And like you said, there's, the natural sources of good bacteria are probably the best. You mentioned orthobiotic. I should be able to have a link in my description for my listeners if they want to look into getting that. Um, but again, thank you so much, Ty.
Yeah.
And I'm going to close out our the podcast right now, and just reminding you that, as you know, I'm Dr. Charles, aka Coach MD, and in your life, I'm urging you to stay strong in mind, in body, and most importantly, in soul. Bye for now.